So hi everyone, and welcome to our Turning Your Projects into Viable Businesses training. For the first half of our training, we have a panel with some really awesome panelists, some current students and some Enactus alumni. The best way to view this panel will be if in the top corner of the screen, you press speaker view. That will push all of the panelists right to the front so that you can just see them and see them a little bit more clearly. And I will hand it over to Meredith.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine, for that awesome welcome. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're really excited to be hosting this training session. Over the past several years, we've seen Enactus teams, they've from across the country who've been pushing their projects to create greater impact and starting to transition them into a business. So this shift is why we're here today. And we're excited to be able to come together and discuss how a project can be turned into a business with our 4 amazing panelists, followed by the training session after. So as Catherine mentioned, I'm Meredith, and I'll be leading our discussion today with these 4 amazing panelists. So without further ado, let's dive into what we're here for today. So we're going to start by getting to know our panelists a little bit better and have them tell us a little bit about themselves and their business. Carter, why don't you start us off?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Meredith. So as she said, my name is Carter. So I'm currently the president at Enactus U Ottawa, and I run one of our projects called Poly. So Poly is a social enterprise that manufactures and sells small-scale plastic recycling systems that allow anyone to kind of turn plastic into new products. So we sell the systems, and then we also provide kind of business training and support so that any operator who receives a system is able to kind of launch a business using the systems right away. So we've been incorporated for about 2 years now, and we've gone through kind of an interesting process compared to, I think, every other business. When we were talking before this, a lot of businesses do go through Enactus projects, go through very different kind of ways of incorporating. So I think it's going to be interesting to hear what everyone else has to say, and I'm excited to share my story as well.
Thank you, Carter. Megan?
Hi, thank you. So I am Megan, and I am co-project manager of the Liberty Project at the University of Windsor. So the University of Windsor Liberty Project program offers transitional employment for women of a certain demographic who have overcome abuse, trauma, addiction, human trafficking, and they sew reusable menstrual pads. So these reusable menstrual pads are then donated to women in third world countries who don't have access to such sanitary products, and this allows them to go to work and go to school and just carry on with their lives while they're menstruating. As well as we do give the women consulting, so this teaches some soft skills, mock interviews, resume building, and helps transition them back into the workforce as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Megan. Nuha, next.
Hey everyone, my name is Nuha. I'm the co-founder and CEO of EcoPackers Inc. I started EcoPackers as a second-year student back when I was at University of Toronto. I was the president of my Enactus chapter back then. I was studying business and environmental economics, and I started EcoPackers just as an Enactus project. I graduated in 2018, and that's when we officially incorporated EcoPackers, and today we develop 100% plant-based alternatives to traditional plastics. Since incorporating and graduating, we've raised about $7 million in investment to scale our operations. We now have teams both in China and Canada, and we're getting ready to launch our first product this upcoming year.
Amazing. Thank you, Nuha. And last but not least, Nicole.
Hi everyone, so my name is Nicole. I am a graduate from the University of Alberta. I just graduated and our project is called Hemp-Packed, where we're trying to create menstrual pads based off hemp and biodegradable plastics. And the end goal is to have a completely biodegradable menstrual pads. This project started about 2 years ago at Enactus U Alberta, and we just incorporated actually this April. So it's a very fresh business, and we're expected to launch our minimum viable product by the end of this year and do beta testing in next year. So we're really excited about that, and I'm excited to be here as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for those great introductions. It sounds like we have some incredible businesses to learn about today and some different paths that everyone's taken. So for our first question, We'd love to hear how your team decided you needed to transition your Enactus project to become a registered business, and how you knew it was the right time for you. So let's start with Nicole on this one.
Okay, yeah, I'll get started. So how we decided to really transition from a project team to a business is when we were trying to create our pads, we realized that we needed a little bit more funding. And since we weren't ready to really start investment, we needed to access government grants. And one of the things that you'll come across when you're applying for these grants is you have to be incorporated. And so that's one of the things that really drove us into it. And I think also me graduating and me having the time to really take this on full time, I think that was when we realized that, okay, like now that someone can actually take this on a much, commitment basis, then we decided to incorporate. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Nicole. Carter, what about you?
Well, thanks. So kind of for a similar reason that Nicole said, one of the big factors for us as well was grants. We, especially at the start, we were very reliant on grant funding to be able to get the project off the ground. And we kind of found the same thing, that in order to apply for a majority of those grants, we needed to have some sort of legal entity to be able to. So that was kind of the big pusher factor at the time. But then as we kind of went, as we went through the process, it made more sense for us to be incorporated as well, since it makes things a bit easier come like tax season. And as you start to kind of grow and sell more, you have to start paying taxes on the revenue that you make, which just becomes a lot easier when you are a separate entity. So you can kind of keep it away from your own personal taxes. And I want to claim here, I'm not a tax expert. I just have kind of learned this from talking to a few people. So hopefully there's not too many tax specific questions. I don't know how much I can help, but yeah, so mainly for taxes and grants were kind of the two big purposes. And then we also are kind of idea with keep it within Enactus as a kind of full-scale business running within the team. So being incorporated just made it easier for us to kind of transfer the ownership of the project within the team and have those agreements in place between team members for who kind of is in charge and who is responsible for the operations.
Perfect. And Megan, what about you with the Liberty Project? How did you guys know when it was time to register and when it was the right time for you?
So currently, we're not a registered business as of right now. We're still in the transition period. So probably, as you guys know, the transition period can vary on different projects. It is a process. But we do know that our project is very costly. So as Nicole and Carter have already said, that we do rely on grants and we do pay our clients a living wage. So it does get a little bit costly there, but as for sustainable income, what we've been trying to do is we are in the transition period, like I said, so we are doing a merchandise line, so that kind of generates some profits for us. But becoming a registered business in the future is definitely something we're looking to do.
And Megan, are you currently in the so you're currently in the process of that? How long has it been, and how long do you think it's going to be until the business is officially registered?
Yeah, so I think finding that steady income right now, we're dealing with getting spurts of it and not really set on something that is, necessarily like steady. So I think once we have a timeline set up for it, so hopefully within the next year we will for sure find something that is steady and will bring us enough profit to generate to self-sustain our project.
Awesome, thank you. So a lot of factors that go into making that decision. And last but not least, Nuha, what about you with your project, registering the business? How did you know it was the right time?
Yeah, so I think back in 2016, there weren't that many Enactus projects that were for-profit corporations. And so at the time, we thought that the best way to go about this, mainly because we had grants coming in or just project funding, was we thought that a non-for-profit would be the best ideal situation, since it was just a research project back at that time. But once we were approaching graduation and we had decided, I had decided I wanted to time and it made sense given the technology was growing, then we started thinking longer term and looking at 10 years from now what our company really needs to establish. And so I'd say there were 5 main factors. So is your company going to have patents? Are you going to have technology? Because if so, you need to have registered, incorporated for-profit companies to do that. Are you going to be hiring a high-tech talent pool? So you need to incentivize using options, equity structures, those type of things. And we needed to hire a lot of PhDs and scientists, so that was naturally a fit. And then as we were actually transitioning out of university and out of Enactus, we were looking kind of for our next foundational accelerator to help us get to our next stage. And a lot of the accelerators in the tech ecosystem in Canada are heavily reliant on for-profit sort of equity-based structured companies. And so that was another key decision-making sort of for us to transition to a for-profit, completely independent entity of its own.
Awesome, perfect. Thank you so much for that. Some amazing insights on how to determine when it's the right time for you to transition. So next, we're going to go into a little bit more around the structure that you decided on for your business. You know, it seems like everybody's kind of at different stages and has different structures for what their business is. And it seems like everyone kind of took a different path on moving that project to a business. So we'd love to know more about the legal structure of each of your projects and businesses that are up and running now. Are they incorporated, a charity, a cooperative? And how do you decide that that's the right structure for you? Nuha, I know you touched a little bit on this, so let's start with you. Touched a little bit about the decision of kind of figuring out what that right structure is. Could you go into a little bit deeper on how you made that decision?
Yeah, so of course there's a lot of options, and it really is dependent on the company, what your product is, what your industry is. For us, it was a for-profit entity that we registered as, and we still have that kind of ratio. So because we went on and we sort of brought in foreign investors into our company, we needed to make sure it was at first a Canadian entity so that we could bring in foreign investors but still remain a Canadian owned and operated incorporation. So that was one of our major factors. Obviously, given our roots in Canada, regardless of how global we go, we always wanted our foundation to be Canadian. And so that was one of the reasons why we did it. And then, of course, you know, with non-for-profits, there's always, it's always a challenge. It really depends on what your motivation is. Again, like thinking 10 years from now, not what's convenient now, but what will be convenient 10 years from now. So I'd say we learned a lot. We made a lot of mistakes early on, and it took a lot of time to transition out of a non-for-profit. So unless you're 100% sure that you're going to remain a non-for-profit or a charity, I would suggest going with the traditional sort of incorporation route.
Thank you for that. And I think that leads us nicely into asking Megan. I know you guys are still in this process with your team. So have you decided what that structure is? You know, have you decided if you're going to go down the route of an incorporated business or a charity, and how have you decided that?
Yeah, so currently, as a whole Enactus team, we are in the process of becoming a registered charity. We haven't necessarily looked in becoming like the actual Liberty Project into becoming incorporated. But as of right now, all of the profits from pad sales, from merchandise sales are all reinvested back into the business. So we consider ourselves not for profit, but we still, yes, we are not registered.
Oh, thank you. Perfect. And so Carter, I know Polly's gone down a little bit of a different path. So what about you guys? How did you pick that structure?
Sure. So when we started, we didn't really know what we were doing. So we found a law firm in Ottawa kind of talk through kind of where we were at and what the structure of Enactus is with how it works. And kind of the path that we ended up taking was, again, registering as a Canadian for-profit company, but with the kind of idea that it was going to stay within Enactus and the profits would be kind of reinvested into the company. So in hindsight, we likely could have gone as nonprofit or for-profit, and I don't think it would have made too much of a difference in our general operations. And nonprofit may have even been better because there are some perks that nonprofit corporations do have compared to for-profit. So looking back, we may have made a different choice, but at the time, it kind of, from talking with the lawyers that we had, it kind of made the most sense to us. And yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Nicole, what about you? You guys just transitioned out of the team. So, did you pick that structure before, and what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I think from the very beginning, we were thinking of incorporation and incorporating it as a Canadian business from the very beginning. I don't think being a non-for-profit really was part of our plan. I think because we know that it's a product, like it's a physical product, that if we wanted to scale the business, we're going to need to seek capital investment. And in order for us to seek capital investment, an incorporated business would make a lot of sense, right? And it's just the most flexible structure that there is. And also the liability that comes with just being a project and then not being an incorporated business, right? So that's also a factor that we considered. That's why we incorporated it as a business. And yeah, like you just, for a product, or if you have a project as a product, then I think it makes sense to incorporate, especially if you're thinking, we're gonna do this in the next, 5-10 years, then you would most likely need a bigger investment for it. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for the answer to that. I think that gave us a good understanding of what we're looking at for the process to actually get there. But let's dig into what the process looked like once you made this decision. What did the process look like for you, and how did you find supports? What kind of timing were we looking at? I know we're all on different timings of how long this takes, but for you specifically, how long did it take? And Nuha, we'd love to hear from you on this process. What was the time frame around actually getting everything and on its own, and what kind of supports did you need to achieve this?
So when incorporating a Canadian registered entity, it's actually very easy. It's just sort of an online application. You just have to fill in some information. When it gets tough is when you have investment and you have to go through due diligence. So I'd say, when you initially start your company or you register your company and it's just you and maybe your co-founders or your other team members, it's easy to kind of keep track of everything. You don't really think of all of the external reporting you need to do. But when you are raising money, or if you are looking for significant capital, that's when you have to make sure that your entire corporation has the official documentation, whether it's board resolutions or entity, minutes or things like that. That all adds up. And so we didn't engage with corporate lawyers until we were ready to actually raise our first round. And that's very typical. Usually in your first round or your pre-seed or your seed deal in investment that you go after, that's when you engage with corporate lawyers to put together your company books. And so they take what you've done in however many years you've established your company, they put it together in official documentation, and that process can take anywhere from 1 to 2 months, depending on who you go with. And if you're fundraising, obviously the fundraising process and timeline adds pressure to that. So it's really based on how much you really need to backtrack. So if you do have a Canadian registered entity and you're looking or thinking about fundraising, my suggestion is to just keep track of as much as possible early on so that you have your book ready to go.
Absolutely. Keeping that paper trail is very, very important as you move forward with your business being registered. That's amazing. Thank you, Nuha. And Carter, since the project's still within the team for you guys, I'd love to hear your perspective as well on this question. What are you guys looking at for timing and support that you kind of found to be able to allow you to do this?
For sure, yeah. So we had we relied heavily on our faculty advisor to kind of help us figure out what the next steps were, since he had been through this before with other projects, and us at the time on the team hadn't. So we really kind of relied on him and his advice as of where to go next. So we did kind of go through a kind of group of lawyers to help us out with the process, since we were a little lost on the team. None of us really had the kind of legal experience or expertise as to what the kind of best steps for us to take would be. So I would say that the actual process itself of finding the right people to work with and figuring out what it is that we were actually going to do was probably about a month or two. But then once we did start the kind of incorporation process, it was relatively easy. In terms of the actual timelines, I would say once we started, it would be a meeting or two with our lawyers. They kind of prepared the documents for us, and then we signed them. Since we felt more comfortable having them kind of complete the work for us, rather than trying to figure out how to do it on our own on our side, just to kind of make sure that we didn't really miss anything or make any mistakes that were going to impact us in the long run. So in total timeline, I would say it was probably about 1 to 3 months or so, somewhere in that range. But a lot of that was kind of downtime, basically waiting for people to get back to us so we could make sure that we are doing everything correctly. So it wasn't a lot of kind of active like working time for a month straight. It was kind of just waiting for our partners to kind of work with us.
Right, amazing. Thank you so much. I think that's great to know. And yeah, I mean, we talk about the timelines, but we know that they will always change depending on how you go about the process and where you're at with your business. So we've kind of covered the structure itself and the process it took you to get here. So let's look a little bit into ownership. These projects all came out of volunteer organizations. You know, everybody was a volunteer at one point that's been on this call. And deciding how that moves to a business and deciding who has that ownership is a little bit of a challenging process. So we'd love to kind of hear from you on how did you decide on what that ownership looked like? And Nicole, I'd love to start with you. How did you guys decide on that ownership structure? Was it decided at the start, or did you guys have to decide that later on in the process?
I think because for the structure at the U of A, it's different for every schools, right? But for us, it's the project managers who are really involved in the projects themselves, and the executive team or the presidents and whatnot, they just kind of allocate the task into the projects and the events team. So for us, there was already an understanding that if we were to take this as a business, it was going to be the project managers who will deal with it. So that was kind of already given from the very beginning. And one thing that we learned through the process was really trying to find out who in the team are really that committed so that we can take them on as actual employees, if you must, in the actual business, right? And especially because everyone, or at least almost everyone on our team, they were all still in school, right? So we only had, and you can't take 20 people into a business right away. That's a little too much. So we had to cut down a lot. And yeah, so just trying to figure out who in your team is committed. And if you're really thinking of, you know, like doing a fundraising in the future with future, I really suggest doing your homework, especially with all the agreements, all the paperwork that you have to do in order to prepare for that. Because for us, at least, the one advice that we got from one of our mentors is to really make sure that we're ready to get that investment round even before we're actually going to do it. Because it's harder for lawyers to kind of do what you did wrong in the beginning, and it's going to cost you a lot more money if you do backtracking. So yeah, make sure you do your homework and just picking your team properly.
Amazing, yes. Definitely some good advice there to kind of start from the beginning. Make sure you have an understanding before you kind of dive into some of this stuff, for sure. Megan, we'd also love to hear from you a little bit on this question. Since you guys are in the process of kind of looking at registering as a charity, ownership looks a little different. It's not just one CEO or one person who owns it. It's a little bit different with a charity. So has your team talked about what that ownership will look like with the team and how that might transition year over year?
Yeah, so we currently haven't talked about really own it, but as of right now, it's kind of just me and my co-project manager who are really running, like, so we said we had a merchandise line, so we are doing all of the shipping and logistical stuff for that, as well as she kind of oversees the clients working and stuff like that. So there is really no allegation as for ownership right now, but I feel as if we were to do an incorporated business or a non-for-profit as a registered business, it would be at least 2 people who are very committed to the project, because there are a lot of moving parts. So it definitely needs more than one owner to oversee 2 sides, as well as kind of bring it together as one project.
Yes, most definitely. Those are some great points about kind of looking at that and making sure you have some people who are committed to that to ensure that, you know, as we move through year over year, there's a lot of turnover within an Enactus team, making sure that you're ready for it. Perfect. Awesome. So next we're going to move into one of the final questions, but one of the biggest questions that I have to ask, because I think that this one is one that our students may be experiencing at this time. Some people on the call might be experiencing some things that you've experienced on this call right now. So you've all come a long way with your business. And with that, I am sure that you faced your share of challenges in the process. So we'd love to hear from each of you on this, on a pivotal challenge that you faced and how you overcame it. Carter, did you want to start us off with this question?
Sure, yeah. So there's been definitely many challenges. I feel like it's kind of hard to pinpoint one that was the biggest one. But we found a lot of challenges early on before we kind of were incorporated. When we had, basically our project team was structured. We started with the president at the time, kind of launched the project itself. And then we had just kind of a team kind of rotate through over the course of about 2 years or so. So at the time we had kind of all of our records in different spots. It was a little less organized than I think it could have been on the back end at the start. And when we did go to incorporate and then had our first kind of tax season, it was definitely a huge kind of learning curve to know what we had to do, because no one on our executive was a kind of certified accountant. We had been through some courses and kind of known the general ideas of it, but kind of figuring out what tax season looked like and what we actually had to submit for that was definitely a huge challenge and a headache at the time because we weren't prepared for it. And I think since then we've kind of realized the importance of keeping everything in line every single day, every time you have a purchase or revenue, which seems kind of common sense. And now it is common sense to me, but definitely not something that I think we're really prepared for. So that was definitely one of the larger challenges. And then I think another two challenge would be kind of figuring out what insurance we need and kind of what that process actually looks like. Because there's so many kind of other external groups that you have to work with to get your insurance set up that we also weren't really, didn't really have a full understanding of when we had started. So getting through that process was definitely a challenge, but again, just relying on kind of resources like this and our faculty advisor to really help us out and kind of send us in the right direction definitely really helped us kind of overcome those.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that. So let's hear from Nuha on some challenges that maybe you experienced and how you overcame them. What was one of the biggest, most pivotal challenges that you saw with this transition from a project to a business?
That's such a tough question. I feel like there are so many challenges, but I think you know, when we started off the project at Enactus, I don't think we really realized what it was. Like, I think when you start off projects at Enactus, you think of, you know, building it with the Enactus pillars in mind. You spend a lot of time on kind of like prepping it for competitions, but then you don't really think, you know, 10 years later. And I think that's what really was the most challenging, is kind of changing that perspective. And we only started doing that closer to graduation, where things were starting to get a lot more real. But if we had, you know, from the very beginning thought of it as a business or a green tech company that could transition out very easily, it may have kind of helped us structure things a lot easier, a lot quicker. I'd say, you know, the team is definitely one of the most complicated challenges because you have so many volunteers on the team, people are involved in the project. But if you think about a business, you need to have your founding members who then take it on and become CTOs, COOs, CEOs. You have to start building roles really early on, even if it is a project manager. So I'd say roles and identifying team. And then, of course, making sure you're evaluating all of the research and the products that you're developing right from the beginning, because it all adds up to your company valuation when you go out to raise money. So making sure you have that patent value, the product value early on tracked as an official company rather than just a research project is really what we learned the most, I'd say, in those few years.
Yes, definitely lots of learnings over the process, but that's a big one, to make sure you're looking at what those roles look like and what's it going to look like in the long term. Thank you. Megan, so I know you guys are in the process right now. You're looking at that registration. What's one of the biggest challenges that maybe you're facing right now? And how are you working to overcome that?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges that we are facing right now is our scalability of our project. So like I said, our project is very costly. So when we started out, it was just a couple women that we took on as clients in Windsor and had them sewing pads. But now We are doing it online, so I guess we could use this as a blessing in disguise and kind of branch out into different cities. So that's something that's been a struggle for us right now, as you know, the whole world is struggling with COVID right now. So that's something that we're looking at, is moving into different cities so we can expand our projects, so we can expand pad production, because we do sell these pads as well as donate them. So that would increase donations and sales for us. Another challenge that we do face is that, like I said, we are in the process of looking at becoming a registered business. So we do need to patent our products. And if we patent our products, that means we get to sell in stores as well. So it is a very, very long process, but we are working towards it, and we are finding different ways to, you know, become successful in that way.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely a different environment that we're in today. It's new challenges that have come up through this, that's for sure. Trying to overcome those can be challenging. But it sounds like you guys are on the right path, and that's great to hear. Last but not least, Nicole, can you highlight one of the challenges that you faced in this process and how you overcame it?
I think probably the biggest challenge was the team, because I told you how we had so many people on our team, especially on the research and development end of things, because we needed a lot of people to kind of researching on how to actually make a pad and how to incorporate hemp and how to incorporate biodegradable plastics on the pad, right? And from very early on, one of our advisors through Enactus actually mentioned that, okay, like you can't have 20 people in your team. You can have founding members. So founders right now, there's 3 of us. And then the rest are kind of going on this volunteer wise still, right? Because we're not making any money yet. But having to cut down from 20 people into 5 people was a really, really tough decision, because everyone on our team, or at least the ones that stuck until right before incorporation, we're very committed. They're all passionate, and we want to bring on everyone, but we physically can't, right? So that was definitely a tough part of it. And how we went about it is I think we had one-on-one talk with every single person on the team and analyze how their commitments are going to be in the next couple of years, and what essentially, like, what are they hoping to gain in being part of HempPact as it incorporates, and, you know, like, and figuring out if they share the same vision as the co-founders do. So that's one of the things that we really looked into. And with how we're structured right now, business-wise, so there's 3 co-founders who essentially like own the majority of the business, but then we also have 5 employees on an employee stock option. And so how that works is we're vested, and in 1 year, they're gonna get 0.5% of the company if they stay. And I think that also shows that the people who are in your team will be committed, because if it's going to take you a year to get the actual stock, then you'll see, okay, like this person actually is here to stay for at least a year. So I think that is definitely something that people should be looking at if you are trying to incorporate and you have a bigger team and you want to cut it down into smaller ones.
Amazing, yes. I guess a good challenge to have, managing the passion, but definitely still a big one that you need to face when you're working with an Enactus team who's very excited about the project that's running. Amazing. Well, you've all shared some great insights that'll support our future leaders. And before we turn to the audience, which we've already got a few questions in the chat that I'm going to share with you in a moment, but before we move to that, with all the teams that are facing similar challenges as you faced to get to where you are today, we wanted to hear from each of you just a piece of advice that you'd share with our students. And I thought that we'd start this one off with Carter.
Sure. So I think probably the best advice I could give would just be kind of go into your incorporation process, whether that's for a charity or nonprofit or whatever, just kind of knowing what it is that you want the outcome to be. It's definitely, it makes it a lot easier when you kind of can see, you know, 3-4 years from now, whether you want to still be an Enactus project, whether you want to be kind of sustaining yourself on your business. It's really important to have those kind of visions or ideas beforehand, so that as you go through the process, you know kind of what you're working towards. Yeah, it's kind of the best advice I could have.
Perfect, thank you. Megan, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I would say my piece of advice is I agree with Carter 100%. Know where you want to be and make a timeline and make a plan for where you need to be at certain points. It really helps you keep on track with your goals and on track with you know, where you want to end up. So just, it might be a long process, it can be a long timeline, but as long as you're staying on track, you know how long it's going to take you to get there, and then you know your checkpoints and where you need to be at certain points, and just to stay on track.
Absolutely. Great advice. Thank you. Nicole?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna make an advice as an entrepreneur here. So as an entrepreneur, you have to wear a million hats every day. But the biggest thing that we learned from this experience, and we're pretty fresh, but the transition is the value of your network and the relationships that you make. Enactus is such a great network to have. So definitely utilize that and ask for help if you need it. You'll be surprised how many people are willing to help you every day, and you'll be surprised how much they can help you. So I think that's definitely one of the things that we took advantage of, and we're still, you know, learning in the process, but yeah.
Amazing. Yes, great advice. And from the perspective of an entrepreneur, it's great to look at it that way, because it is a transition from going to being a volunteer to being that entrepreneur that leads that business. So thank you. Nuha.
I feel like everyone took all the great advice, so I feel like I have to add on to that. I think I definitely say, don't be afraid to think beyond nationals competition. I think, you know, everyone's structuring projects for that, and that's amazing. Are building social enterprises, not even just in Enactus, but in other accelerators and networks. I know in the past 2 years of building EcoPackers, I've relied a lot on mentors that are founders and entrepreneurs of other companies, may not be linked to Enactus, but just generally building a company. So I'd say think beyond Enactus, think beyond competitions, think super long term, and start building those relationships, like Nicole mentioned, very early on, and talk to people like us who have already failed 100 times, I'm sure, and can give you the advice.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, there you go. For anybody in the audience who's looking for some questions, we have some time now, but we've got these panelists to check in with as well if you're facing some similar challenges. Thank you so much for all of your great advice and all of the information you provided throughout this panel. Now we're going to turn over to our audience and see what kind of questions they have for you. So I've seen a few in the chat so far, but if anybody has any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat. We'll have time for a few questions. If I miss them, feel free to send it in, or you sent it earlier on in the panel, feel free to send it again. But I'm going to start with the first question that we have from Raymond. He's asking, be interested to hear on how the actual school was or was not involved in the incorporation or registered charity process. Is it possible to have a team as a whole be a registered charity, but have a project registered as a for-profit business? And this question is open to anybody. So from our 4 panelists, if any of you would like to chime in, feel free to.
So I can speak to the first part of the question. So I can say that for our experience, the school itself wasn't really involved in the process. Our faculty advisor kind of showed us which direction to go to and helped connect us with people in his network, but they weren't in any of the registration or on any of the actual official documents. So they were kind of there as a support network, but not involved in any of the actual legal work.
Awesome, thank you. Megan, I'm not sure if you have any insights on the second part of this question, just possible to have a team as a whole be registered as a charity, but a project's registered as a for-profit business. I know you guys are going through the process of registering as a charity. Just wondering if you ran into anything along these lines or have any insights you'd like to share.
So we actually haven't run into anything like this before. It's a great question, but I don't think I can speak on it because we are currently reinvesting all of our profits back into our business. So we would go under the category of registered charity.
Thank you. And Nicole or Nuha, did you have anything to add to this question?
I also can't speak for the charity and the business part, but the first part I can kind of talk a little bit about. Like Carter said, our faculty advisors definitely helped in introducing us to their networks, especially the lawyers that we got involved with. It was one of our mentors who connected us with her, and he's still part of our board of advisors as of right now in an incorporated business. So they definitely helped in just introducing us to the people that they know can help us. So, and we're utilizing all that network right now.
Perfect. Thank you. That was great, Raymond. I hope that answered some of your question. And it looks like maybe there might be a few other businesses that you could reach out to in the network that are facing that challenge. Sorry, Nuha, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I was just going to say it was completely independent for us. We didn't really have any relation to our school or faculty advisors when we were doing the incorporation process. I think with the team itself, like Enactus U of T was its own sort of club or extracurricular club at our school, so it had no kind of connection and didn't really interfere with any incorporation that happened with EcoPackers.
Okay. Thank you. So our next question we have is, what's the primary reason for seeking foreign investment rather than only Canadian-based?
I don't know if that was directed to me. I think it might have been when
I believe it might be directed to you, yes.
Okay, so I think we weren't specifically attracting foreign investment, but in the tech ecosystem, you'll often come across investors who are not just Canadian. And so we wanted to make sure our structure was friendly enough to attract any investors who were strategic for our company. So for us, we wanted to make sure we had the best investors regardless of where they were located. And so we have a mix. We have some investors from the States, from Canada, and then from Hong Kong, given we have operations in Asia now. So I'd say that just be strategic with who you bring on to your cap table. It's so important, and it continues to be a part of your legal entity forever. So it's really important to make sure you have the right foundation to bring on and attract investors everywhere in the world and do what's best for your company.
Thank you, Nuha. Great. So we have another question, and it's a little bit more geared towards Nuha, you as well. So given the nature of your business, how you went about finding a business model and how you went about digging deeper, reaching out for mentorship, especially in relation to transitioning from what sounds like a fully social project to a fully for-profit model.
So a couple years ago when we did start EcoPackers, if any of you were in Enactus before, it was purely a packaging company and we were just developing our own eco-friendly packaging. And so I would often have these packaging samples and I would eat them. That was our product and that was really it. And then we went out into the real world and realized that that wasn't a project that was going to scale. It was too niche. It wasn't really a business model that could sustain itself. And so we didn't really transition or pivot the product until we focused on joining science-based accelerators. So we joined, as soon as we graduated from university, we actually joined Next Canada as well as Creative Destruction Lab, which are two really great accelerators focused on founder development as well as science-driven ventures. And that's where we had to really focus on digging deeper into the product, understanding our product market fit, figuring out what made the most sense to scale up, and then we had to be accountable for a lot of the deliverables that we have from our mentors. So I would suggest if you're still not yet sure about what business model makes the most sense for you, I would suggest getting yourself involved in other accelerators that have mentors of extremely high potential who can guide you through that, challenge you, and put you to the test when you're developing some of these key strategies.
Amazing. Thank you. So the last question that we'll have before we move into our training portion is, when you have multiple projects within Enactus, how did you choose the project with the most potential? Do you have a criteria? That one's directed at all of our panelists, so feel free to chime in.
I can try to answer, I guess. It's a really good question. I feel like for our team, we run about 6 projects. This year, it's kind of varied throughout the years. And I feel like you don't really like actively choose a project with potential, because most projects do have potential. Almost any project, if you have the right people on it, can kind of get to and like it kind of become a really impactful project. But I would say kind of I guess the factors that go into choosing, I guess, what your focus is on just really depends on the people, because some years you have kind of project managers that are super, super into the idea and really want to make their project grow. Other years you kind of just maintain status quo. So I feel like it kind of depends on the people that are there, and there's really, I guess my answer is that there's no one answer, if that kind of makes sense. I don't know if that's super helpful, but that's I guess the perspective that I have.
Perfect. Thank you, Carter. Anybody else want to add to that? Okay. Well, thank you so much to the audience for all the questions. Thank you to our panelists for your amazing insights on this process. It is really incredible to hear the process that all of you went through and where you are today. We appreciate you taking your time to kind of come out and share with all the students who are going through similar challenges right now. So we'll take this opportunity to move into the training portion, but I'm just going to hand it over to Catherine to move us along.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was a really great conversation, and I think our students got so much out of that. So our panelists, thank you again so much for taking time out of your busy days to come and speak with our students. And now for the second half of our training session we have today, we have 2 people from League of Innovators, Manisha and Joanna, who are here to kind of take you through some more tactile and more specific things about how you can take your projects and turn them into businesses. So you've heard some people who are working through it, who have done it, and now we're going to give you some of those skills to make sure that you can do it too. So over to Manisha and Joanna.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Catherine. That was such an awesome panel discussion. Thanks everyone for sharing some really, really great stories and really setting us up for this training session as well. And now allowing us to go right into how are we actually applying all of this? How does it show up for us? Depending on where your Enactus project is as well. So I know it's been almost an hour. That was a lot of information. If you want to take a quick chair stretch, feel free to do so. If you want to grab some water, you can do that as well. Tea, coffee, whatever. Before we officially dive in, we have just over an hour for this. We want to make sure that it is super valuable for you and really encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. There's a lot of content that we'll be going through, so we will also make sure the slides are accessible after as well. So before I officially start and kick us off, I also do want to acknowledge the land that I am currently on and have the honor of living, working, and playing on. So I'm on the land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. So I'm on the West Coast in beautiful Vancouver, BC. And I know I didn't officially introduce myself yet either. I'm Manisha and here with the League of Innovators team. I will let Joanna also briefly introduce herself before I dive into this.
Hi, everybody. Super excited to be here today. So I am joining you today from the traditional and unceded Coast Salish territory of the Lekwungen people, otherwise known as Victoria, British Columbia. So just a waterways away from Manisha on the West Coast. And my name is Joanna. I'm the Executive Director of League of Innovators and have been with the organization since its inception.
Amazing. Thanks, Joanna. So Joanna will be running most of the session while I just kick us off, and we'll be helping answer any questions over chat as well. But before we really deep dive into the content, I wanted to share a bit more about League of Innovators. Who are we? And what we'll be chatting about today as well, and what the session will really focus on. Of course, there's only so much we can cover in an hour, so this is not all the information you could possibly have. There's so much more, but we've tried to fit in as much as possible in the short 60 minutes that we have here. So as the slides are being shared, I also wanted to, before I mention a bit more about League of Innovators, share my own personal story as well. Enactus was really where it started for me too. So I was part of my Enactus chapter. So that was at SFU, at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, for 4 years, basically my entire time that I was at SFU. And Enactus was what really introduced me to the social innovation, social entrepreneurship space as well. So back in 2009, when I joined Enactus, I had actually helped our chapter start our project focused around teaching entrepreneurship to high school students. And at that point, it was also just volunteering for me. I was building my resume, gaining some skills, being introduced to something new. And never did I think that 10 years later, that is basically what I get to do in my career, and really what led me to League of Innovators as well. So when I graduated and was done with Enactus, I ended up actually starting a nonprofit with my mentor, who was also the Enactus faculty advisor. And that's how I met him. He had mentored me through Enactus. He was my coach for the competitions. And we actually ended up starting a nonprofit together. And that's what I worked on for 3 years. It was all focused on career development and soft skill development for young people. And then I ended up merging that nonprofit into League of Innovators when we were launching in 2017. So, you know, that's my way of saying you never know where your Enactus work and network and community can really take you. It's so incredible and has really helped me kind of kickstart my career in this space as well. So that brings us to League of Innovators and why we're here today, why we're doing this work. Our big mission is to make sure that we are able to democratize entrepreneurship for young people. And what that really means is, how do we make entrepreneurship as accessible as possible? It's normally seen as a very intimidating career path. You know, a lot of us have done this work, maybe in a school project, volunteering. But then the second we look at it as whether it could actually become something that we do full time, it's scary, and it's something new for all of us. And I know I had those feelings when I was considering whether I could even see myself as an entrepreneur, because I just didn't think I could do it. So for us, our big mandate is to support young people across Canada. We generally work with young people under the age of 25 that are building businesses or just starting their journey as an entrepreneur, and are focused on championing young people that are doing the work, wanting to do the work, and doing it through this entrepreneurial mindset and social purpose, which is, again, so aligned with Enactus, hence why we're here helping deliver this session. So how we're doing this work, just to briefly mention our programs and how it shows up. Of course, I won't go into this in a lot of depth. We're happy to answer any questions after as well. But our goal is to do this work all the way from helping people discover what entrepreneurship really is to actually accelerating startups that young people are already running across the country. So we have an incredible resource platform called the Innovators Academy, which is resources, content, videos, workbooks for someone that's just starting to learn about entrepreneurship. And then we also provide these resources for educators that are teaching entrepreneurship as well. We run a number of camps, which of course now are fully virtual for those exploring entrepreneurship. And then we have 3 programs for those that are actually taking the leap into entrepreneurship, which include Foundations, which is an 8-week incubator program, Labs, which is a 12-week accelerator program for those that are committed to the startups and are ready to actually run a business, which I know a lot of you would be a great fit for, and Boost, which is more of a residency program that are scaling as well. League of Innovators is based as a national charity, and with our mandate to be as accessible as possible, all these programs are free of charge. There is no fee. We want to make sure that these resources are completely accessible to you, and we don't take any equity as part of these programs either. All right, so that brings us to our topic for today. So we are big believers of the fact that what you're working on currently through Enactus and the projects that you're working on can become a legitimate business. And you're already on track to doing so. A lot of it is really that reframe of how you see the project that you're actually working on, but we'll also talk through the different tools and techniques that you can use to make sure that you're able to then make that transition happen in a more logical way as well. So we're big fans of reflecting before we even start this work. And I'm sure a lot of you you've been working on your project for different levels of time. Some of you might have been doing it for longer, some might have just started. But regardless, there's so much value in taking time to actually reflect on how it's been for you before we even start looking at what's next for you as well. So I have a couple of questions. We'll spend 30 seconds on each question. And at this time, depending on personal preference, if you want to get a notebook, if you want to write this down, if you want to just pull up a notepad on your laptop as well, feel free to do so. But we'll spend 30 seconds on each question. I encourage you to spend more time after as well, because 30 seconds is not enough. So first question, what has been the best part of your entrepreneurial journey? Some of you actually, this might be the first time where you're looking at this as an entrepreneur. Maybe you've never labeled yourself as an entrepreneur, but if you actually think of what you're doing, the problem that you're addressing, what you've built so far, you are doing that as an entrepreneur. So what has been the best part of it? Maybe it's a project that you ran and you got to impact that one person that you always think about. Maybe it is competing in these Enactus competitions. That's okay too. Maybe it was a needs assessment that you were doing. So what's been the best part? We'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, and the next question. Or is it working on the slides? All right, so we've looked at the best part. What's been the toughest part? What showed up for you that made you maybe question why you were doing this? Maybe there was one particular initiative for you that was really hard to implement. Maybe you woke up one day and it was just a really tough day and a really busy day. That's fine too. So what's been the toughest part for you? Give it a couple of more seconds. Okay, and third question. Why do you personally care about this work? So based on the project that you're part of, you might be a project member, you might be running the project. Why did you get involved in that particular space, that area? And why do you care about it? And of course, in some cases for you, there might not be a personal story or experience that you're able to relate back to, which is fine. And you can really think back on, was there a moment when you were running the Enactus project that really made you more passionate about this cause? Because a lot of times I'm sure when we're thinking about volunteer work, we're thinking about the skill set that we're building, how it's going to really help us build our network. We might not have put a lot of thought into the cause itself. But if you're thinking about turning it into a business, you definitely want to be thinking about your why behind this, because you're going to be spending so much more time and energy into running this business that you want to be able to wake up and feel like there is a very clear why on why you're doing this work too. So last question, what excites you most about turning this project into a business? So of course, this question and any other question, I encourage you to continue to reflect on after the session as well, because it's an exciting opportunity to be able to look at your project as something that can become a viable business, but also I'm sure all of you are aware of the fact that it is definitely a commitment. All the panelists were very real about the fact that it's a lot of work. It's not an easy journey. It's not going to be easy. But if you're able to spend some time on why you're actually doing this work and be genuinely excited about it, it will start you off on the right foot too. Okay, so I'll basically from these reflection questions, I'll introduce you to what we're really covering today, and the two, I would say, concepts and terminology that will constantly come up during this session. So number one is the concept of validation. So I'm sure that's something that you've heard of as you were even running your Enactus project. And as I remember from my Enactus days, we used to constantly talk about the needs assessment and had we taken time to actually understand the need and the problem. And of course, being in the space of entrepreneurship now, that is the number one thing, is have we actually taken the time to prove whether this is something that is needed for people? So that is the one thing that we want to introduce you to right in the beginning is, have you actually spent time validating your problem and solution? So a question for you, again, we won't spend time like reflecting on this, but something for you to start thinking about is, what moments in your Enactus project have actually helped you validate your problem and solution? Whether that was a moment where you had more people attend than you anticipated and made you realize like, oh, this is actually something people really want. Whether that was a moment of someone even sharing their success story with you after and telling you how much it had actually helped them. So what are those moments that actually validated what you were building was really needed? And then the second thing that we'll really dive into today for this session is this concept of the lean canvas model. So of course, we're putting very tangible tools into this work of actually building a business. So the lean canvas model is a tool that was created by Ash Moria. And he's also the co-founder of Wired Reach. But basically, where a lot of times traditionally are used to hearing, business plans, create a business plan for yourself. You might be working on a 30, 40-page business plan, but that is not needed anymore. A lean canvas model is really used for startups that are in the early stage to figure out how they can test and validate their startup, and is really just a replacement for a much longer business plan. So we'll show you what a lean canvas model now looks like. And if you're already familiar with a lean canvas model, tell us over chat. Let us know if you've used it. If you have, awesome. This is a great opportunity for you to refine it as well. But this is basically what a lean canvas model looks like. It's a one-page document that really summarizes what your business is focusing on and what that business model really is. And the numbers that are on the lean canvas model represent the order of what you might be working on first. So as you can see, number one is problem and customer segments. What you'll be focusing on first is like, what is the problem that you're focused on solving and who are you solving it for? Number two is value proposition. So what is that unique differentiator of what you're really working on and the value that you're providing? Number three is then looking at, okay, this is the solution that's actually going to help address that. Four is the channels. Five is the unfair advantage. And then we go into cost, revenue, key metrics. So we've highlighted the first few boxes because as we're looking at turning your Enactus project into a business, the assumption that we're making is that those are things that you've already thought of. You've thought of the problem, you've thought of the solution, you've thought of who it's for, how you're actually delivering it. And now you're starting to think about what are some potential revenue streams? What are my costs when I turn this into a business? How do I actually measure success? But of course, if you haven't thought about those early boxes as well, this is an invitation for you after the session to really spend time on it and really go through that process of completing this lean canvas model before you might even dive into the cost, revenue, and metrics as well. But for the sake of this session, we'll be focusing on those three areas. And of course, you're welcome to ask any questions about the entire lean canvas model as you work through your business as well. So with this, I will officially pass it over to Joanna, who will go over all these aspects of the lean canvas model, and again, invite you to ask any questions during the session, and we can get to those during and at the end as well. Joanna, over to you.
Thanks, Manisha. So hi, everybody. I just want to do a quick sort of backgrounder on me and how I found my way to League of Innovators and our previous iteration of our organization, which was called The Next Big Thing. I've been working in the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem for a little above 15 years now, and have really done it actually across a couple different universities, including UBC, UVic, and SFU, where I also lecture on entrepreneurship and innovation. My work has obviously been very focused on acceleration, so helping entrepreneurs, whether they're young or not, really get their ideas into a format that can be replicable, that can be scalable, and that can enable them to really grow a business or a social enterprise or a charity if that's the case. And it's really about figuring out the different components that you need to really get going into a place where you can scale. But all my work has also been very, I would say, infused with social entrepreneurship and social innovation. I've been involved with a lot of different initiatives in that space since my early days in my career, including like BC Social Impact Partners, a lot of work across BC, but also across Canada. And I've got some really good experience in that space, especially what and how you can actually develop a social enterprise that has multiple entities underneath it. I would say that social entrepreneurship can be sometimes a little bit more complex than just a typical technology startup. And that's because you're always trying to bring impact and financial sustainability together. But that's not that it can't be done. It's just you have to have a different perspective about it, and you have to bring in some tools to really be able to develop something that works for you, that meets the vision that you want to create in the world, at the same time make it something that's financially sustainable for you and the organization, so that you can create the impact you want. But let's get going on some of the ideas and pieces that we believe are really important for you to consider as you start turning your projects into something that's more of a tangible, real business, social enterprise, or nonprofit or charity. So if you think about it, this startup phase that we keep on talking about is actually a temporary state for your organization, because you're in this process of searching for something that's repeatable, that you can then scale, a business model that you can grow into a mature business. And that can take some time. And this is why we use the tool like the Lean Canvas model to help us really iterate and validate or disvalidate our ideas and assumptions really quickly, so that we can get to that point where we can repeat our sales, our operations, our services, whatever that may be for your particular startup. But remember that this phase that you're in, the first idea you have is probably not going to be the last idea you have, and certainly not going to be the idea that maybe will grow into that sustainable business or social enterprise. So always remember to be open to change, to hearing things you don't want to hear from customers, from shareholders, from stakeholders, whoever it may be, and be open to always be iterating or pivoting that startup till you get to a point where you can scale. And so really, this is how we look at the entire process. There's many different parts, from problem discovery, customer validation, customer creation, and then company building. And it's really in that between customer validation and customer creation that we find what we call product market fit. So this is where we are at a stage where we can really start repeating and scaling our business model. And that is almost like this magical thing that people talk about, especially in Silicon Valley and in tech entrepreneurship and investment. And it can be elusive to some people because it depends on what sector, industry, type of business you're in. A lot of people try to equate all the rules and checklists we have in the tech startup ecosystem to every other type of business. But the reality is, every different type of business is in a different industry, and different rules can apply. If you think about it, a CPG, so a consumer-facing product such as food or a piece of clothing, the business around it will be built very differently than, say, a technology company that's developing sustainable packaging, or even a social networking tool. So you really have to think about this entire picture and where you fit within it. And hopefully, you have started to dabble in problem discovery. This is why you're here. This is why you've opted to continue building your Enactus project. You need to focus on the customer discovery part and customer validation. And often what happens is you're in this loop between customer discovery and customer validation, because every time you go out to your customer with a product or an ask, you're going to get feedback back. You're going to get positive feedback. You're going to get mediocre feedback. You're going to get negative feedback. Whatever it is, that feedback is actually going to inform whether your assumptions about your customer's decision making processes, about their thinking, about their feelings, about their purchasing decisions are actually valid or not. And that will then inform you how you can actually build up more of that customer discovery components. Everything from, how you package your products, how you message communication to your customers, to how do you build your website, and all types of channels that you're going to interact with your customers. So lots to think about there. A lot of people just want to sort of see it as this one-way arrow and just want to run through everything. But the big thing about this process as it layers onto the lean canvas model is that it's okay to be in this customer discovery, customer validation loop for a while, because the more time you spend here and the more you understand these components, the better you'll be off, the more you'll understand your actual customers. So when you go out there with your product, you go out there with your messaging, you go out there with your ads, you're going to be more certain that those are going to work, that the customers that actually come to you are going to buy your product, and they're going to buy it again, and they're going to tell their friends, and they're going to have this loop of growth, right? And so really thinking about, don't just jump over these components of really thinking about your startup and how it can really be built around the customer. If you're building a charity nonprofit, that's your clients. They're not necessarily your customers. But what are their needs? What are the pains that you're really solving with your product or service? And so how do we get to this magical place called the product market fit? As I said, it's a bit of a magical place, and it takes some time to get there, and it all depends on what kind of product service you're trying to create, what kind of impact you're trying to have. You do have to have a market, 100%. You got to be, and what I mean by market, it's got to be, a segmented market. So thinking about, am I in food? What kind of food am I in? In healthy food? If I'm in healthy food, am I in organics, or am I in the cold fridge shelf, etc. And then thinking about, is that market actually, is it just my local market and I don't mean grocery store market, I mean like the market of people that are there to buy your product or service. Is it just 100 people, or is it 1 million people, or is it 1 billion people? You need to understand the size of your market, because if the size is very small, maybe it's just you and your friends and family, is that enough for you to actually build out a startup or a social enterprise that has that financial sustainable longevity? You again need to identify a real problem that's worth solving, because that will enable you again to have that sustainability over time. Discover your customers, 100%, it's part of the secret sauce, and make something people actually want and that it works. There's a lot of startups across time that have developed amazing visions for products or ideas, even have gotten a lot of investment into them, but were never able to actualize something that worked. And so while a vision is great, and it's so important that you have a vision that you believe in, that you want to pursue, because this is, you're going to, as Manisha was saying, there's going to be good days, there's going to be bad days. And it's a process. As we heard from our panelists, like, they love what they do, but it takes a lot of work. So you really need to believe your vision. This is how people also join your startup, either as investors or supporters or advisors or partners. They believe in your vision, but you also want to make sure that your vision is something that you can execute on. And then 5, this is why we're all here too, find a business model that's going to support your vision that you're trying to create. And then the last piece, which we always talk about, is test, measure, learn, repeat. This is something that, again, you don't want to jump over. You want to be certain that customers want to buy your product, the type of your product that they want, certain features, etc. So don't jump over this. Make sure you think about how you're actually going to test your assumptions. How are you going to test purchasing decisions? How are you going to measure that? And how are you going to actually make decisions yourself from that evidence and from that knowledge? And so this is typically what we say, this is a typical sort of process over time of how you're going to use the lean canvas model. It's not something that you just use once, you fill it out and you paste it on your wall and you just leave it there. It's an iterative process. You're constantly learning, gathering information and evidence that will then impact the different parts of your lean canvas, and that together will actually really inform what kind of business model, what kind of revenue streams, and then ultimately what revenue model you're going to have in that business model, and how you're going to go forward till you have that, you know, that green lean canvas that you can go further with and really build a startup from. But one of the biggest questions and that dictate how you're going to really build something that you're going to stick with, that you're going to believe in, is thinking about, why are you building this? And this is something more of a reflection point for you to think about as you pursue you know, turning your project into something that's an incorporated version of your project. And I just want to insert in here before I move on that if you've got questions, just pop them in the chat. We'll get to a bit of Q&A at the end, but if you've got questions as you see slides pop up, by all means pop them into the chat, and Manisha will just interrupt me so that we can answer them in due time. And so, you know, thinking about, why are you building a startup? Are you solving a problem that you really care about, that maybe impacts the environment or your community or people that you love? Is it just a hobby that you fell in love with and now you see a really opportunity to build it into a startup? Suddenly, you know, people want to buy your artisan products or your food product, whatever that may be. Or is this a lifestyle that you want to really live? We've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs over the years. You know, some come to us for many different reasons. Some just really love the lifestyle of creating, of bringing ideas to life. And this is just a way that they work. Entrepreneurship is definitely a mindset. It's a way of working and creating and problem solving at the core. And then thinking about, you know, fundamentally, whatever reason you went into building a startup, you know, are you here to build, you know, the next unicorn? Are you here to build the next Facebook or Google or Apple? Or are you here to build what we call a gazelle, which is a high growth startup, but that's not necessarily aiming to be like the $10 billion company, but they're a high $100 million company and they're growing fast and they're doing super well. The reality is, you can build a startup and a company and you can be very successful. You don't always just have to be a unicorn. In fact, most businesses in this world aren't unicorns. They're actually quite large gazelles. And then, or are you in it to build real impact? And can you do multiple things? Can you do multiple of these? Can you be a gazelle and really create impact in the world? You know, we look at companies that we consider social enterprises at their core, living that social purpose, like, you know, thinking about like the Patagonias, Ben & Jerry's, Warby Parker's. They've been able to achieve both because they've really, you know, created a company that's driven by social and sustainable purpose at the core of its mission. So really think about, like, why are you building this? And whatever answer you have, there's no right and wrong. It's what's right for you. That's the most important thing to think about. And that will also dictate the decisions you make in building your startup, in incorporating an entity type. So do you want to do a charity? Do you want to build a benefit company? Do you want to just incorporate it as a classic for-profit corporation? Which brings us to this idea of, you know, a social enterprise. Again, as I mentioned some of these bigger examples of social enterprises that we always refer to, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller social enterprises across Canada, across the United States, that really marry this idea of a business model or a sustainable financial business model with social and environmental purpose at the core of their operations and products and services, really following through in solving a big problem in the world, but doing it through an actual enterprise model, which is more than possible. And we're seeing more and more entrepreneurs going down this route. And in fact, like, our perspective, might be a little biased, but we believe that any company can really incorporate social and environmental purpose into their operations. When we look at the landscape of the B Corp certification, for those of you that are not familiar with it, it's a certification that came out of the United States, certifying a company's social purpose and sustainable purpose across its organization, from internal operations all the way to product and service and manufacturing. Certifying that companies are good for the planet and people. When we look at B Corps, we have everything in the B Corp movement, from tech companies to food companies to CPG products to B2B, so business to business, solutions to SaaS products. You can be a social enterprise, and you can be virtually in any industry and sector and have any type of company that does those social and environmental impact at the core. So thinking about, is this something you want to pursue? This is, it's interesting because I've been in this social entrepreneurship space since, I would say, like early 2005. And at that time, we used to talk about social entrepreneurship, and people were like, what are you talking about? Really, like, we don't really understand. How can you be financially sustainable and do good for the planet? And like fast forward, 15 years into the future, and a lot of people are really considering this as a very valid way to move forward with your startup or business. And it's exciting because this is the realization that you don't have to do capitalism in that very cold, we don't look at anybody else but our dollar bills. You can create a business that really does consider every aspect of our communities, of our physical environment and natural environment, of the people that work with us and the people that we work for. So really thinking about how you can be a social enterprise, or think at least in a social enterprise way with all the decisions that you make. And these are great questions for you to filter through. We're not going to go through these today, but you'll have these slides really thinking about, how does this apply to you? Because again, I know I get asked this question a lot with the different accelerators that I'm involved in, and it always, my answer is always like, it depends. People are like, just tell me the answer, but it truly does. It depends what industry you're in. It depends what kind of startup you're building, and it depends what kind of products or service you're building. So really be honest and transparent with yourself and your co-founding team, and what are you creating, and how does social impact, how does sustainability really feed into this? And social entrepreneurship is so much bigger than just building a product or service. It's really, a different way of thinking about problem solving, and that, your product or service or your company can really be the driver for change, and believing that. And maybe at the beginning, as with any company at the beginning, when Apple started, when Facebook started, when Google started, when Twitter started, when Warby and Parker started, they just started with one idea, with one product, maybe two products or services. They weren't the monolithic giant companies that they're now. So you just have to start somewhere, but have that bigger vision of like, hey, this is the change I want to create in this business sector, or maybe in the industry, or maybe in the world, whatever it is for you. Really think about that, because if we've learned anything in the last year, is that change is more than possible. It is actually the only way forward in our world. And you as an individual, you can actually influence change more so than you ever think that you can. And then having a company or a social enterprise or even a charity, you can create real change through that, through the actions you take. So really thinking about that, what does that look like for you? So don't be afraid. If you want to see big change, go out there and do it. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty now. So what does incorporation actually mean for you? So all the panelists, they all really talked about, incorporating in some form or fashion really enabled them to be like, okay, this is serious. We're gonna get going on this. And I would say that is a really big step in moving forward. I often recommend to startups and social enterprises, at the end of the day, incorporation is not your final vision, right? It's a means to an end at the end of the day. it does inform what you can and can't do as an organization. So spending time in that lean canvas model, understanding what your business model is, what kind of impact you want to have, what you actually want to create with this entity that you're building, those are really formative questions in figuring out then what kind of incorporation are you actually going to create, or are you going to follow? So obviously there's lots of options, also different options depending on where you are in Canada. In BC, the new benefit corporation is a new version of for-profit incorporation, dictating that you are a social purpose corporation in BC. It's not available in other provinces yet. You can always be a sole proprietor. You know, that is like incorporation on your own under your name if you're a solopreneur. I mean, honestly, I've met solopreneurs that have gone up to $1 million in revenue a year before they went and incorporated as an actual for-profit with shareholders and investors, because what they were doing was actually quite easy to do as a sole proprietor. Usually it was consulting or services. If you're creating products, then incorporation as a for-profit is probably highly recommended. Partnerships really common in some forms of companies. So when you look at like architecture firm, agencies, a lot of them will be actually built up as partnerships versus just incorporated for profit. So they're incorporated partnerships. You also have cooperatives, a different format. Then we've got obviously nonprofits, charities, which are not on this list. And then you have all sorts of variations of under that umbrella. So I know I heard a couple questions about like, oh, can like a charity or a nonprofit have a for-profit? And there are ways that you can actually craft social enterprise, umbrella companies, or charities that own different entities and have different revenue streams coming into them. Obviously, I'd highly recommend working with lawyers for that, but that's not out of the question. Typically what we see is nonprofits doing that versus charities. Right now, charity law has not been changed for 100 years, so it's highly outdated in terms of what we can't do. But the idea with nonprofits and charities actually owning businesses and owning real estate and owning enterprising entities is been warmed up in government. There's a $750 million social finance fund that the government has created to invest specifically in social purpose entities, many of them nonprofits. So the changes to corporate law are coming. It's just a matter of time. But there's a lot here. There's a lot that you need to consider. Again, there's restrictions with what you can do, how you can do things. And some of the biggest restrictions that these incorporations will present to you is how and who from you can seek money and capital. For instance, if you're a charity, you obviously can't have any investors. You can't own up shares. It's a lot harder to get loans. It's a lot harder to get some even federal funding to support, obviously, startups. They don't give it to charities. And then vice versa. Granting, all of that is predominantly in the nonprofit and for-profit world. So really thinking about, do you want to go out and raise capital for your startup through equity? So angel investors, venture capitalists. If that's the case, then there are limited amount of actually options for you, which typically are incorporated for-profits or benefit corps. Sometimes cooperatives, but those have really limited options for actually taking on external investment. So really thinking about like, what's your move forward, and how do you want to really build this entity? Is some deeper work that you may have to do. And so it brings us back to this, like at the end of the day, you have to do the work at your end to really figure out what parts of your project have you actually validated, what parts of it are still in assumption format, and how are you going to actually validate that you can build something that's financially sustainable. So it brings us to a really big part of building a startup, which is revenue streams. As a for-profit company can have many different revenue streams, but it can never have zero revenue streams, because then you're not gonna, if you don't have profit, you're not gonna be financially sustainable. So thinking about, what is that revenue stream or streams that you're considering through your particular entity or project? Often what we hear is, especially in the project stage or ideation stage, it's, oh, we want to solve a problem in the community or with the environment, and what we're going to do is we're going to run these programs, and then people are going to donate money to us. That is not a revenue stream on the for-profit side. So if that's your only option is sponsorship or donation, that is not a real revenue stream. And maybe you need to consider, do I want to go down the nonprofit charity route? And just some terminology that's really important to think about, because these things are different. And a business model is your entire structure of your business and how it's organized and how it works, from the product and the customers and the channels, and then the cost structure and revenue. All these things make up the business model. What's your revenue stream? So it's one revenue stream is a single source of revenue. And again, can't have zero, or it has to have many. It can have one or many revenue streams. It all depends on the size and the complexity of your structure. And then your revenue model, it incorporates all the different parts of your actual revenue streams, and it describes how it all works together, and that includes also some of the cost structures that are involved. And so revenue generating streams, there are very many. And so I just put a couple on this slide just to give you some ideas of the total different ways that you can build out an entity to be a business. So everything from ad-based revenue, subscription models, you have retail sales, which is probably one of the oldest ways to run a business. Everything from food to any kind of CPG product, retail sales is a big revenue stream. But now, as we are in 2020, thinking about revenue streams from retail becomes more complex. Are your retail sales just from physical retail locations, so brick and mortar? Are they from more pop-up style retail sales? Are they from e-commerce, which is also retail, but it now comes in a different format? Are you selling then in subscription boxes? So are you a partner in that? So as you can see, that can get a little bit more complex, and thinking about all the different ways that you can actually get revenue streams, because all of those actually represent what we call, I'm sure all of you are probably maybe familiar with profit margins. Profit margins is essentially like, how much are you going to make of each product sold? This is minus, the production cost of that product, how much it takes you to actually create it and manufacture it, to how much it takes you to advertise it, to how much it actually, costs you to get it to your customer. So what is that profit margin? Selling on an online store and an e-commerce environment is actually, you're going to probably get a larger profit margin than if you sell in a physical store, where you're giving part of your profit margin back to that retailer, whoever that retailer is. So thinking about what are those margins, and realistically, where do I want to be, or do I need to at this stage actually test all these different options? And see what works for me, because sometimes it does take that testing period, as we said, to figure out, where is my time best spent? Where do I see customers coming back to buy more or to spread the word? So lots of different ways to generate revenue. There's a lot of models that are being used online. Everything from pay per play to auctions. Another revenue stream that people, don't always consider is if you're running a social network or some kind of an online platform, or even subscription let's say a subscription box, you know, what's the data of the information that you're gathering about your consumers? What's that really worth? And it, you know, are you going to sell it? What are you going to do with it? So data is another way that you can generate revenue. And again, fee for service, commissions. There are lots and lots of other forms of revenues. We can send you a whole list of everything. But it's sort of, again, figuring out what's your product, what's your service, and who are your customers? What do they resonate with, and how are they making decisions about product purchases or service purchases, and what's the best way to reach them? I'm not going to go into these examples in depth, but just wanted to share some ideas, show you some examples of the sort of breadth of a business model, of how complex it can become. Again, as I mentioned, you know, the big companies that are large now, they started, you know, Uber started with just ride sharing, but look at them now. They've got a more complex business model with multiple revenue streams, and they even multiple revenue streams within their specialized product offerings. So thinking about, you know, what does that look like for me? You can envision what that looks like for the impact you want to have, or for the type of company you want to create, and then start with the first product. So don't try to start with everything. Just be like, okay, this is the first thing we need to do to test the model, to really validate that early adopters. So the first people that are going to buy our product are going to come, they're going to pay for it, and that they're going to value it. They're hopefully going to tell their friends about it. Maybe they'll become our ambassadors. So thinking about, okay, what's the bigger picture, and then where do we start? Another example of an online platform, Spotify. Maybe some of you use it to listen to your music, but there's lots of different ways they actually make money. It's not just, you know, the subscription from users, right? So thinking about, like, okay, they've got subscribers, obviously paying their monthly fee to access their music. But the whole thing starts actually with the one person that signs up to Spotify and gets a free account, right? So with that free account, you know, they advertise to you. And so what are the different incentives, and how kind of the different revenue streams and model make up the bigger model for you? And where can you take advantage of the opportunities that sort of the model presents to you, right? So thinking again about the bigger picture, and then being like, okay, where do we start, and where's our fundamental core of what we want to try to do? So going back to, I don't know if any of you have done really a lot of work in vision, mission, like what are you really trying to achieve with the work you're doing with your project, and working through that as well. So what's the vision of what you're trying to create in this world, and how are you going to do that? And one of the examples I'll quickly talk about, because I think it's a great example, is one of our alumni, is Tara Bosch with Smart Sweets. She started a stevia sweetened candy company to kick sugar and to really give another option to people out there, so they can sort of have a bit of a sweet tooth, but not have the detrimental health effects of eating sugar. So she developed Smart Sweets. Initially, she just had the gummy bear product. You know what? She went around for a year before she actually like put that first product on the shelf. So that's how long it took her. That doesn't include the probably 6 months before that she was making, you know, testing things in her own kitchen before she came to us at the next big thing in 2015. So in that year that she was with us, before she hit shelves, she went out and tried to understand who her customers actually were, who wanted this candy. She had like a whole lineup of different types of candies that she thought were awesome, but she ended up going to customers being like, what do you actually want to eat if it was going to be smart candy? And it turned out it was gummy bears and not these other options she had, like stevia sweetened marshmallows and all sorts of weird kind of candies, which she's coming up with now, but didn't start with, because she was really looking for what's the one product that's going to get me to the shelves, that's going to get buy-in from these early adopters. And instead of going after every possible person that could, like candy, which is quite a lot of people, quite a lot of kids, everybody. She went after the health and wellness industry, and specifically people in that would go to health health and wellness stores. So you're thinking things like Popeyes, specialized stores that didn't necessarily cater to the entire, sector of maybe 20 to 40-year-olds. It was catering to people probably in their 20s and 30s only that could afford supplements, that could afford sort of higher margin products, but were looking for the healthy options because they were going to the gym all the time, because they wanted to stay healthy. They didn't want to eat sugar. And she went after them. The first store she was in was Popeyes, and she ended up going across the country with them. And everybody that purchased her product at Popeyes, she would do giveaways on social media, like literally every week. And she would ask them to do almost this guerrilla marketing campaign. She only had, again, a sweet and sour gummy bear and a regular gummy bear. And she would say, hey, if you like my gummy bears, then can you, on my behalf, sort of a comment bomb Whole Foods and Save on Foods and Safeway to be like, are you carrying Smart Sweets candy? And that was her approach to, really being able to get in front of customers and getting that first traction in her product. It took her a while to get there, but because she focused so much on these early adopters and this sort of almost entry point of her product, she was really successful because she didn't go everywhere. She just went to these few customers at the beginning and really got their buy-in, who became her ambassadors, and then started pursuing other options, then went to Whole Foods, then actually went to Save On. And now she's, all across North America. She just had a massive exit, but it takes the time to really figure out who your early adopters are. And the other thing I would say about Tara's example too, is she really listened. She really listened to what customers were saying, to what customers wanted. And we can't emphasize this point enough. Listening to customers is going to get you so far, not just at the beginning, but throughout your journey as an entrepreneur, throughout your journey as a business. So make sure you're listening and you're open to hearing things you don't necessarily always want to hear. And how do you choose that model? Right, great segue. Manisha, let me know if there's any questions that we need to get to. How you get to your model really does, you have to think about your cost structure. Again, you have to listen to your customers. What does it mean to actually, sell this product or create this product? Thinking not just like, how much is it gonna cost me to manufacture? Let's say if I'm manufacturing, a piece of clothing, is it just the manufacturing, or how much is textile gonna cost me? How much am I gonna have to pay my sewers? Is it going to travel across the world? How much is shipping going to cost? How much is the rent in a physical space where I have to warehouse all these products? How much is my marketing team going to cost me? How much am I going to cost the startup? So thinking about cost well beyond just the very initial cost that you think about, it's much bigger than that, because that's how you actually evaluate the true cost of a product and the development of a product. A lot of startups, a lot of founders in the early days will just brush over human capital costs, and it's the cost of people. At the end of the day, you can't have a financially sustainable company if you can't pay your people, because you must pay your people, including yourself. That's the only way that you can build something that's repeatable and scalable. So lots of different costs. Consider what that looks like for you. Let's say you are also, I know I saw a couple questions about intellectual property from the universities. If you're building something, a lot of the times, I'll be honest, if you're building a charity, universities most likely won't have ideas, won't be a part of that necessarily legally. If you're developing, though, new technology, so something in a lab, whatever faculty that may be, you have to think about if this was developed under a course sometimes, if this was developed under a research project, then the university will have intellectual property into that particular product. So commercialization is a big part of universities. all across North America. So thinking about what that means to you, I've worked with a lot of clean tech companies and biotech companies that have chosen to, within the first year or 2 years, buy out the university so that they would own the majority of the intellectual property and company. Big note, and this we won't dive into this, but we'll just quickly tap onto it, volunteers versus paid employees. So while a lot of, you start out as a project, it's great, it's an Enactus project, everyone's there volunteering their time. Once you start incorporating as a for-profit, in many provinces, including BC, you cannot have a volunteer as a for-profit. You either have to give them a share of your company, so vested interest in your share structure, or you have to pay them. And that's something to think about. Is volunteers are only common really in the nonprofit and charity side. There's lots of ways that you can actually think about how to pay people. Again, share structures. What does that look like for your co-founders? What does that look like for your early employees you bring on? Understandably, at the beginning, you are not making money. A lot of people use vested shares over a period of 1 to 4 years, really bringing in that sweat or paying for that sweat equity in the early days. Again, no magic formula. You really have to think about what options are out there for you to bring money and bring the talent in. We've shared a couple of different ways that you can find funding to support yourself in the early days. There's many more. innovationcanada.com .ca is a great tool to actually find what kind of funding you can actually access all across Canada, and we can share the link after as well. And the last piece around the lean canvas that we'll talk about is the key metrics. So we've talked a lot about validation, pick your model, pick your revenue streams, but you have to figure out how is this really working? And how are you going to figure out if it's really working? And metrics are your best friend, because metrics actually show you evidence that things are working. Maybe they're stagnant, or maybe they're not working. Whatever that is, they're going to show you the realistic current position or future position of your organization. And it's going to show you the success of your business model. And again, it depends on what kind of model you choose, what kind of incorporation you choose, and what industry or product you're actually creating. You'll use different metrics. What we've used right now, what I'm showing you right now, is some of the sort of bigger ones that can be consistent across industries really, and are pretty much agreed on, or you have to think about this. You'll have specifics depending whether you're tech or whether you're building a physical product, but revenue, big. Are you making revenue, and how quickly? Month over month, week over week, year over year. Those are the acronyms over there, just in case. But if you go down the route of either getting debt financing or equity financing, you'll be asked for projections. And this, measuring your revenue at this stage in the early days, you're measuring it week from week, so that you can show week over week growth, you can show month over month growth, etc. And they'll be looking at that because it shows, the traction you're getting in market or with your customers. Customer acquisition cost, CAC, is a big one. Essentially, it's showing you how much it's costing you to acquire one customer. So if it's costing you more money to acquire a customer than what we call the lifetime value of a customer, that's not a good equation. You want to make sure that your customer acquisition cost is less than the lifetime value of that customer. Because if it's larger, you're not going to get financially sustainable. The second to last is margins, which I already talked about. Margins are so big. You have to consider margins. You have to understand them. And you have to understand what that looks like for your product, depending on what kind of, what revenue stream you're pursuing, what kind of channel you're pursuing, what does that margin look like for you, and what goes into it. And then conversions. What are people converting from, your marketing efforts, from your, from your website, from, storefronts, whatever it is? What are the conversion rates for your product? So what now? maybe I'll stop quickly to ask if there's any questions. I see a couple. I can't see the chat, by the way, so I just see like a little dot with numbers. So I'll let Manisha help me with that one. But what now? Really, you need to think about the next steps of what you're gonna do with your startup idea. Are there any questions, Manisha, in the chat?
Yeah, there aren't any questions. There's one question from Annie, and Annie, you're welcome to let us know in chat, or even if you want to come off mute if you still want to ask that question. I know you said that based on what Joanna mentioned, that's helping you with the question already. Okay. There is a question that came up before and just now again on funding using the Lean Canvas model and how that can support too. Another point, I know we only have 8 minutes remaining, so we were thinking of doing a breakout room, but I think we'll have to skip that just for the sake of time because we want to make sure that we can get through some questions too. So that's just a note for you, Joanna, as well.
Yeah, no, I figured that. Thank you. And yeah, just pop in a question. Manisha will get to you. So the what now really is like what to do next. You need to validate. And you need to start, as I mentioned, really think about what's your vision for your project? What do you want to achieve? What kind of impact do you want to have? And let that really dictate the decisions you make from there. Work on your Lean Canvas model and really work through the rest of the pieces and highlight the pieces that you're completely making assumptions about. What are the things that you honestly actually don't know? You're making an assumption, and how are you going to test that? To systematically do this. We're not going to do that right now. And this is your to-do checklist. There's a lot of things to do that are more operational, but at the end of the day, we encourage everyone, use the Lean Canvas model as sort of this central, like, think about it as like a central hub of information and evidence and assumptions that you're going to gather. You're going to make decisions from there. You're going to, again, like, what are your assumptions? What do you actually know? Versus what do you need to find out more about? What do you need to test? How are you going to test it? And how are you going to make decisions? And maybe we'll jump to questions now. If there are any. I see more in here. Some questions. Just help me.
Yeah, Joanna, there is a question around, and whoever's on their iPhone, we can't see your name, but even if you maybe want to expand on the question around funding through the Lean Canvas model.
Yes, yeah.
And James, are you looking for follow-up from us on Annie's thought or from Annie on...
So I will have answer one quick question. I'm not sure about the Lean Canvas. I'm assuming getting funding through the Canvas. Yeah, that's not the only thing you're going to use, right? Like, the Canvas is your operational tool to get to that point. It's internal, right? Sometimes if you're doing a project, some pitch things will maybe utilize your Canvas, business model Canvas, or Lean Canvas. But at the end of the day, you're not going to go to an investor or a debt financer with your Canvas. You're going to go with your pitch deck. So this is you're not there yet necessarily. Maybe you are if you're sort of further along. Typically, to get financing, you're going to put all your ideas into an actual pitch deck and tell the story of what you're creating, why you're creating it, and the opportunity that exists. Hopefully that was helpful.
Mm-hmm. Question: is finding a revenue stream or sustainable model more important than doing R&D?
If you're in a technology-based company, so I'm not sure what kind of project you have, but if you're in a technology-based company, both are just as important. So you need the R&D because you need to have a technically viable and validated product, right? but at the same time, you also need revenue streams. So a lot of these things can be done in tandem, right? So while you're doing research and development, you're going to start talking to potential customers. So I've worked with a bunch of different tech companies in sort of the clean tech space that will start going out, having conversations with potential partners, potential customers, and get letters of intent or letters of purchase intent as a means of like, okay, we're interested. This is like, novel technology, and we're going to use it.
Awesome. Another great question. When reaching out to customers to validate the problem, should we state the reason for the interview or not mention the potential solution at all?
So when you're doing problem discovery, you don't want to mention the solution. You don't want to like guide the conversation. When you're in problem discovery phase, you actually want to understand the problem inside and out. So you're going to go talk to potential customers, other stakeholders, and most of the questions you're going to ask are going to be inquiry questions where you're actually trying to get a story out of them. Never ask a yes and no. People are going to be like, yes, no. That's not going to tell you or inform, these bigger assumptions you're trying to solve, or especially if you're trying to like really understand a problem, it's not really going to help you. So really try to glean out those stories, decision-making points, how people are feeling, how does this problem actually affect them? How are they trying to solve it? So yes, and don't talk about the solution. You're just like, hey, I'm trying to understand this problem. We see this as a huge thing, and we know you're touched by it in some capacity. Would you be open to a conversation about it?
And just to point on that, yeah, problem validation versus solution validation, definitely two different processes.
Yes,
like
100%.
Problem validation, you might not mention it, but in the solution, you definitely want to get a sense of like whether they will use your solution or not too.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. There aren't more questions, so you're welcome to wrap up.
Okay. Awesome. So again, I'll actually go back to this one quickly. A bit of a checklist of all the things you need to think about. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. There's a lot of work you have to put in logistically, as well as like bigger thinking type stuff around vision, mission, the values that you hold, that you want your company to hold, and really how you want to move forward. And yourself, why are you in it? What do you want to get out of it? Yourself as a person is really important. This is an investment of resources and time, and you want to be passionate about what you're creating. It's what's going to get you through the long run. And again, we've got a bunch of programs, not just a shameless plug for LOI, but we do work with young entrepreneurs. It is our sweet spot. We've got a massive network of young entrepreneurs we've worked with across the country and growing every couple months. Our number one goal is to support young people to step into their potential as entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is hard. It's sometimes harder as a young person. You may not have the credibility, finances, etc. So we're there to really help you, guide you, open the network. If you're interested, let us know. But we've got a couple actually applications open. One is for our batch 6 labs applications. That's the 12-week virtual accelerator. And then we also have our residency. So those for those scale ups that are really at a stage they've found seed funding and are ready to grow. But, we are really passionate about seeing young people bring their special, unique abilities and their visions to life. And we really can't wait to see what you create as well, whether you're part of labs or not. I mean, we cheer on all young people in this pursuit. So I wish you all luck, and hopefully we'll get to see some of you. I didn't get to see any of you actually, like I'm just staring at my slide right now. Hopefully we'll get to actually see you, even virtually.
Thank you so much to Joanna and Manisha. That was a fantastic training. I know there's so much for all of you to go back and think about now. And I know we're at time, so I won't take too long, but just a huge thank you again to our panelists and of course to Manisha and Joanna at League of Innovators. Please check out everything they have to offer. It can be helpful for all of you in your Enactus endeavors or beyond. I also put a training feedback survey in the chat, and I'll send it out to you after as well so that we can continue to improve our trainings going forward. You'll get this recording and the slides in an email either today or very worst case Monday morning. Thank you so much and have a really fantastic weekend. I hope to see you all virtually soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Catherine.